Thunder
Hi,
Underground,
this is
y'all.
Glenn Hughes, and you're listening to Thunder Underground.
Welcome to episode 428 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Thunder Noise. And this week's a good one because the one and the only, the voice of rock, Glenn Hughes, is back on this podcast for the third time. That is something that I never really even thought about saying when this podcast started over 10 years ago. You know, when we started this podcast, there were all these, grand visions and, hopes of who would be on this podcast, not really knowing if any of that would ever come to fruition. And here we are, over a decade later, and I'm getting to talk to Glenn Hughes for a third time. So I'm pretty excited about that because he is one of my favorite singers of all time. I firmly believe him to be one of the greatest vocalists in the history of rock and roll. And I don't say that loosely. I mean, if there was a Mount Rushmore of rock vocalists, in my opinion, he would be one of those four faces on that mountainside. But before I get into more, rambling about how much I love Glenn Hughes and how happy I'm that he's back on the podcast once again and that he has yet another stellar solo album coming out very soon that we're going to talk about, I need to let you know who sponsors this podcast, and that would be DEB Concerts, a concert promoter based right in the Tulsa area. They brought lots of great acts throughout the years to the downtown Tulsa area at both the club level and the arena level, and they book the Roadhouse stage every year at Rocklahoma, the DEB concert stage. They also book the pre-party at Rocklahoma. That happens on the DEB concert stage. This year, the pre-party, it always takes place on the Thursday prior to the 3 days of Rocklahoma, which is this coming Labor Day weekend, the end of August. Not far off now, just right about a month, or actually under a month. So if you're in this area of the country, you want to check this out. DEB Concerts pre-party stage will feature sets from Sebastian Bach, of course most well known as being the voice of Skid Row in their heyday. Lita Ford, of course known for many great rock songs throughout the years, one of which being that amazing duet she did with the mighty Ozzy Osbourne, rest in peace. That show that day will also feature Trickster, Rocket Science. The rest of the weekend on the DEB concert stage will feature sets from Mike Tramp, formerly of White Lion. He's been on this podcast before. Dime Store Riot will be performing out there once again, as will Fist of Rage. Both of those bands have been on this podcast multiple times. We'll also feature sets from Van Halen, a great Van Halen tribute, Orianthi, the former lead guitarist for Alice Cooper, great blues rock guitarist. Can't wait to check her out. And many other great sets. Hit up rocklahoma.com to see the entire lineup, which features sets from Alice Cooper, Shinedown, and many, many more. You can see all that at rocklahoma.com, debconcerts.com, to be kept up to date on everything. And of course, we keep you up to date right here. Also, Rocklahoma Bitches is a sponsor of this podcast. Rocklahoma Bitches have been going out there to celebrate Rocklahoma for nearly 15 years now. They started out there in 2011, and they just keep getting bigger and better. And they're very charitable. They're always handing out merch. Since their beginning, since their inception, all their merch is free. They'll give it to you anytime they see you. T-shirts, koozies, pins, hats, buttons, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. This year, also, they are promoting the fact that this kind of plays in with what I just said with DEB Concerts. There will be sets each night at Rocklahoma, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Directly after the headliner on the main stage ends, a band will be kicking off on the DEB concert stage. This is the way Rocklahoma used to do it years ago, so cool to see them bringing this back. So each night, a band's going to be rocking until about 1:30 a.m. on the DEB concert stage, and that is sponsored by Rocklahoma Bitches. They're also very charitable people. They sponsor the Cancer Sex benefit every year that happens in Tulsa, Oklahoma near the end of the year. This year I'm sure will be no different. So if you see Rocklahoma Bitches, let them know you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. And also, we have Sunset Tattoo, a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed, Native American owned, and they have a female artist on staff full time. Hit them up, call, message, walk in. to talk about what work you're looking to have done. If you got something ready to go, they can easily help you with that. If you are having trouble bringing your idea to life, they can definitely help you out with that. Hit up their socials, Sunset Tattoo Tulsa, on Instagram and Facebook to see all the work they've done throughout the years, and they specialize in many different styles. I've had work done by Jake over at Sunset Tattoo more than once. I'm very happy with it. I know many other people that have as well. He has also tattooed many artists that have toured through Tulsa and the rock and metal world. So hit up Sunset Tattoo Tulsa and tell them you heard about him right here on Thunder Underground. All right, Glenn Hughes is the guest of honor today. He's the guest of honor anytime that he is a guest, in my opinion. I try to do this without getting too overly fanboyish, but I truly, like I said, believe this is one of the greatest voices in rock and roll history. If Glenn Hughes is a name you're not familiar with by his name, you're surely familiar with some of the projects he's been a part of, bands he's been a part of throughout the years. You know, he came on to the music scene worldwide with his band Trapeze at the beginning of the 70s. We talk a little bit about that coming up because he had some success here where I'm from, which is in Oklahoma. He was also in Deep Purple in the mid-70s. When they revamped their lineup, Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale came in and they released the amazingly classic album Burn, one of the best rock albums of the 70s. They did 2 more albums with that lineup, and then Glenn has released tons of solo music throughout the years. He also had a project called Hughes Thrall with Pat Thrall. He was in Black Sabbath for an album called Seventh Star. You know, it's one of those albums that is talked about throughout history. You know, some people absolutely love it. Some people absolutely do not. I fall in the category of love. You know, I pretty much like all eras of Sabbath. But just hearing Glenn Hughes with Tony Iommi, those two guys work so well together. And that album was intended to be a Tony Iommi solo album, but pressure from the record label told him, you have to call this Black Sabbath. Of course, so we can try to sell a little bit more than we would if it was just your name. I suppose that's got to be the reason, right? Glenn Hughes was the vocalist. He did some live shows with them, but didn't hang around too long after that. But they remained close friends and they worked together again throughout the years. A couple times they put out projects together. Fused, which was Tony Iommi and Glenn Hughes working together. Such a great album. And then they also did an album called The Depth Sessions. Same thing. Tony Iommi and Glenn Hughes working together is just metal magic, in my opinion. Glenn Hughes has also been a part of the Dead Daisies for an album in recent years. You know, Dead Daisies is most well known for having John Crabbe as their singer, but there was a period not that long ago where he left for a bit. Glenn Hughes stepped in, they released a fantastic album, and he's had his group Black Country Communion, now going on the better part of 15 years. They released their most recent album, 5, last year, and just like all the other ones, fantastic blues, hard rock. That group is, you know, a super group of the highest degree. Got Jason Bonham on drums and the mighty Joe Bonamassa on guitar. Of course, Glenn Hughes on bass and vocals, and Derek Sherinian from the band Dream Theater on keyboards in that band as well. He had a band called California Breed like 7, 8, 10 years ago that was fantastic, kind of one-off, that was done with Andrew Watt, who was well known as being the producer and writer and sometime guitarist of the 2 most recent Ozzy Osbourne albums that came out, you know, in 2020 and 2022 or 3. What was the other one? Ordinary Man, and I forgot the name of the other one off the top of my head. You all know what I'm talking about. These 2 Ordinary Man, whatever. Look that up if you don't know, but they also, what else? I'm talking about Glenn Hughes. I would almost, you know, divert into an Ozzy tangent there for a second. I caught myself. But Glenn Hughes worked with Joe Satriani on Satriani's recent solo album from a couple years ago. I believe he just played bass because it's Satriani. It's a instrumental album, but that also featured Chad Smith on drums. Very cool band right there. I'd love to see that 3-piece go out on tour. And he recently recorded a song with Satriani working with Steve Vai, the Satch Vai Project. If you hadn't heard of that, that's out touring right now. You know, two of the all-time greatest rock and roll guitarists ever, Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, have done the G3 tours many times throughout the years, and now doing this Satch Vai thing. They released a song called I Want to Play My Guitar a couple months ago that featured Glenn Hughes on bass and vocals. But we talked about all that, talked about other stuff. I just wanted to give you a rundown because there's been many times throughout the years when I'm talking with someone who might not be a music geek such as myself, to when I say, you know, who are some of your favorite singers, and I mention them, and one of them is Glenn Hughes. I've had more than a couple people throughout the years say, who's that? Or they weren't familiar with it. And then when I explain some of these things, you know, people are like, oh yeah. But there's also people that didn't even know some of that stuff. So I implore you that if you wanted to go on a deep dive of Glenn Hughes music, you know, it could take you days. But, you know, just start right here. Right here in the current is that he has a solo album coming out in September called Chosen. And the title track, Chosen, and a song called Voices in My Head have both been released already. Those singles are both out there. Voices in My Head is such a great song, one of the best songs released in 2025 in my opinion thus far. This whole album is classic from start to finish. We talk about that. This man doesn't put filler on his albums. All right. So instead of just rambling more, let me let you know before we jump into this. Like I said, he's been on here twice before. So if you're a Glenn Hughes fan and you're checking out this podcast for the first time, I'm going to let you know that you need to check out episodes 383 and episode 280. Those were the last two times that Glenn Hughes was on this podcast. So you've got some stuff you can check out there. So we're going to talk about here coming up right now, Glenn Hughes' brand new solo album, Chosen, which will be released here in just a little over a month. I would like to note as well that, you know, we talked briefly about the Sabbath Back to the Beginning event. And of course you can, you know, tell by the way we're talking that this was recorded before the death of Ozzy Osbourne was announced. And oddly enough, we recorded this episode recorded this on Zoom. And then like 30 minutes to an hour later is when the news came out of the passing of Ozzy. So that is why that's not acknowledged in this talk when we're talking about Back to the Beginning. All right, let's jump into this. Here is Glenn Hughes.
You know, it's an album. It's another Glenn album of like wherever I'm at that time. That's the version of me. You know, this album was recorded a year ago in Copenhagen, and I think each album I've ever made is slightly different to the other one. I know there are rock and soul albums, as you know, but I try not to repeat myself. So for me, the album is about purpose and about acceptance and love and faith and walking through the fear.
I'd seen the quote where you said, you know, the lyrically, you know, you wrote this a little more introspective than usual. What was it that kind of, you know, pushed you that way?
Um, you know, it's been. I mean, I make albums. This is the first solo album I've done in 9 years, but I make albums quite a lot. And for me, since you know, the lifestyle change I had 30 years ago, I've been writing about the human condition, and each album goes deeper into it. I've been studying Buddhism for 15 years, and this kind of way of life for me and the way I want to live life works for me, and I get a chance to talk about it.
Since it's like a solo album, is that why it's a little more introspective, you think, than normal?
I think so.
Is it
Yeah, I work with a band called Black Country Communion.
right?
We're still making albums, and it'll be the same kind of thing with that, but maybe not so deep. But you know, for me, I write what's happening at the moment. You know, whatever I feel is important for me to say. Really, I mean, not politically or, you know, for any kind of status. I'm just writing how I feel.
Did you have any co-writers on this album, or is it entirely you?
No. On the Glenn album, it's always songs written by myself.
That's what I figured. One thing I've always noticed about you, whether it's your solo albums or, a band project, the music always seems to be consistent. There's usually not fillers. So do you write?
Oh.
And I know you've always said that you write consistently, but when you write an album, do you write until you have 10 or 12 songs, or do you write a bunch of music and whittle it down to what you
You
think's the
know,
best?
good question, Trent. Lately, with Black Country Communion and Glenn Solo, I write specifically for those 10 songs.
Okay.
But I do write all the time up in my studio. I'm writing little bits of pieces of stuff, and Chosen was written for the purpose of getting another album done. I started writing last February, and I was done in late April.
When you have, like you said, little bits of pieces of stuff, is that something you just have on a hard drive and go back to on
Yeah,
occasion, or how do you handle that?
I do have bits of pieces like that. Yeah,
One of the songs that, jumped out to me was Black Cat Moan. And I feel like
yeah,
the guitar riff and the bass and the groove kind of harkens back to some of your funk
that's
soul
right.
stuff. Like, kind of speak a little on that song and your thoughts on it.
You know, I felt I needed a song like that on the album. It's a very a Glenn original song from all those years ago, where I started out with my band Trapeze,
Yeah.
and the album's a trio, by the way. And I wanted to explore the simplicity of having bass, drums, and guitar. Just very simple stuff. On that track particular,
Is the tour going to be a trio as well?
it's going to be a trio. First
Okay.
time in a while.
Yeah. It's called I mean, I know you've got the Chosen Years tour coming up this fall. You're doing Europe and South America. Like, what is that phrase? I love that phrase, the Chosen Years. Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, number one, the album's called Chosen, as you know. And
Right.
for me, I get a chance to choose what I want to do now. I don't know if you know, but I've been doing the Legacy Purple songs for a few years, and I was really time to move on and go back to the original stuff I wrote all those years ago with brand new material, of course.
You mentioned trapeze, and last time that you were on this podcast, you had asked where I was from, and I mentioned Oklahoma, and you said that
Yeah.
back in your beginnings with trapeze, you guys had some good success in the Oklahoma and Texas area. Like, what do you think it was about this area of America that like identified with trapeze?
Well, you won't remember this because you weren't born, but I played Norman University, was it,
Yeah.
in 1970 when we were playing. My band were opening for the Moody Blues, and we played in Norman University, and the crowd was so amazing. And we were doing, Texas and Oklahoma and the southern states. I found so much love and energy from the southern states of America that I fell in love with you guys down there.
Being a young guy from the UK, was it a like a kind of cultural shock at first, or did you have a good, kind of, quick chemistry with people, or how did that go?
When I came to America, I was only 19 years old, 18 years old, and I fell in love with America and Americans, the culture, and I think as a soul, I've been living in America for many lifetimes.
Something else that you had released a couple years ago. I mean, I guess not you technically, but that album Overcome that you had done with Robin George
Right,
many,
right.
many years ago. I really, really dug this album. Like, what are your memories of like the recording process of that, and that time working with Robin back then?
I was signed to um, a big company in London, Warner, and they had on their label Robin George, a guy from my hometown, in Wolverhampton in England, and they it said, "Would you come over and work with him?" I was just getting sober at the time. It was 30 something years ago, 33 years ago, or something like that, and it was a good chance for me to start again. So we made those basically were demos you're hearing of the Overcome. So I was really getting my feet wet again by doing that album with him. I didn't even, by the way, Trent, we didn't even know it was going to be an album. It was just a bunch of songs.
Oh, so back then it wasn't ever intended to be an album. It's just something
Um,
that got released, way
I,
later on, or
we weren't really going to make a record. It was just a bunch of songs we were creating.
Okay.
And I really didn't write a lot of stuff on that. Again, I was just getting my feet wet. And so Robin George did a lot of work on that. Rest in peace, Robin.
Have you ever had any other music or project like that throughout the years that got kind of put on the shelf that never got released that you're aware of or that you
Uh, I hope not. I don't think so. No, I mean, I pretty much remember mostly everything. I don't recall anything else that's under the carpet.
Right. Well, bringing it, back up to this year, you were involved with this song Rocket with Robbie Williams recently. And,
Hmm.
I had seen when that came out, it had said, Robbie Williams and Tony Iommi, and I didn't even
Yeah.
see until recently that you were involved. Were you playing bass on that or were you like in
No,
the
I was
background
singing.
vocals?
I was
Okay.
singing. Robbie was a fan of my work I did with a band called KLF, big band in England. And I did a song called "What Time Is Love" in 1991, and he fell in love with that song. It was a number one song in the UK, and he fell in love with that song and the way I sang that song. So he contacted me about 18 months ago and asked me if I'd like to join him on a song, and I said sure.
So you're in the background vocals on that?
I certainly am.
Okay. Speaking of, being on a track with Tony, you had tons of, work with him throughout the years and, there's talk of him doing a new solo album. You're doing a solo album. Is there any chance we could see something in the future, you think, with you two guys working together again?
We are really good friends. He lives on the other side of the world, and when we speak, we talk about shall we do more work, and it's like a matter of finding a window or an opportunity. People are asking, am I singing on his album? But it's not me; it's somebody else. I don't know who it is.
Okay. Speaking of Sabbath and all the, headlines in the rock world from the back of the beginning show, having a small part in the Sabbath history and working with Tony, seeing something like this, celebrating a
Yeah.
band while they're still alive, all original members, what do you think something like that means to like rock
Well,
music?
they're,
Because you
they're
don't get to see that often,
well, those guys are family to me. We grew up together. We were born very close to one another. So, I've known each and every member of that band since 1970. So you can imagine we have a lot of history and friendships. So I only want to say I'm really grateful that they got an opportunity to do this. I think every band deserves to have one last moment. And if that was the last moment, but you never know, do you?
Right. Is that something you would be interested in doing yourself, like making a claim that this will be my last show whenever that, or is that something you've ever even thought
You
process?
know, I I don't really think like that. I
Yeah.
I, I don't think I'm going to be the one to ever say this is going to be my last show to sell tickets. My last show will be my last show, and I'm hoping I will be around for a while. But I don't really plan on doing anything. It may change, but I don't know.
Another song you're recently involved with was the I Want to Play My Guitar with Satch Vai.
Hmm.
And while I know you've worked with Satriani recently in recent years on his solo album, is this the first time you had been involved with something with Steve Vai?
No, I did a song with Steve Vai and Chad Smith 10 years ago.
Okay.
We covered the Highway Star song, on a Deep Purple kind of album. So I've known Steve. He gave me a guitar in 1989. Um, but we've been friends since the early 80s.
Was that a one-off song or
They
were you
we've been talking about doing something like this together as for years. When we were making the song, we were all, very happy and said, "Well, we should do more." So I saw them. We played a show with them about a month ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if I do more work with Joe and Steve, as they're really, really good friends.
you've been involved, working with so many legendary guitarists throughout the years, where does something like this rank where you've got two of the all-time greats on one single track?
They really are, in my opinion, Trent. They've got their own league of kind of guitar playing. The Vice Satriani. There's like and Eric Johnson. There's like those three guitar players are all etched together.
Yeah.
So for me to play with both of my friends, and it was a really great time doing that. Really was.
Kind of touched on it a bit when you're talking about the new album Chosen and the lyrical content, but I've always loved your quote, music is the healer.
Yeah.
Seeing you say it throughout the years, like It's kind of it has an obvious meaning, but I think people could take that in different ways. Like, kind of explain what that quote means to you.
Well, for me, it's like music will never change. No, it won't change politics. It won't change the wars, but it is the only thing as humans that we can actually embrace. Because, for instance, if someone's having a bad day or a bad day at work or a bad day at school, you know, I can only suggest that when they go home, draw the blinds, put the headphones on, and listen to the music that soothes them and makes them feel. And that's why, for me, music can heal. It can give you joy, and it can bring all kinds of emotions. I think it is the greatest healer we have alive today is music. It really is.
I love that. Absolutely. Thank you for, taking the time with me today. It's always a pleasure. I absolutely love the new album.
You're welcome, Trent. Hope to see you sometime down the road, my friend.
There you go, Glenn Hughes. A huge thank you to John Freeman of Freeman Promotions for his continued support of this podcast throughout the years. And of course, a massive, massive thank you to Glenn Hughes for taking some time out of his day to talk to me there on Zoom about his brand new album, Chosen, which comes out here in September via Frontiers Records. This album, if you've heard the two singles, Chosen and Voice in My Head, you know those songs are great, and I can promise you the rest of the album is just as great. This is definitely one of those year-end list rock and roll albums, in my opinion. I think you'll enjoy it if you've ever liked Glenn Hughes at any point. And if you did not, or if you do not like Glenn Hughes, first off, it's weird that you're still listening, but second off, you're crazy. Because this man is the voice of rock. That is an undisputed fact. Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Glenn Hughes. Super excited that he's been back on here now for a third time. Also check out episodes 280 and 383. Those are the most recent times he was on in 2020 and 2023. And now here once again in 2025. Tons and tons and tons of stuff you can check out throughout the years. Over a decade worth of episodes and content out there from Thunder Underground. 427 episodes previous to this, besides those 2 episodes with Glenn Hughes. Gene Simmons of Kiss has been on here before. Other Rock and Roll Hall of Fame members include Vivian Campbell of Def Leppard and Dio, Dizzy Reed of Guns N' Roses, Dean Castronovo of Journey. Journey's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but Dean was not inducted with them, unfortunately. But I have to throw that out there because that is one of my favorite interviews of the last 2 or 3 years. Just fantastic stuff from Dean Castronovo. Also had on members of Living Colour, Whitesnake, Leonard Skinner, Megadeth, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Queensryche, The Dead Daisies, Winger, Slaughter, Tesla, LA Guns, Junkyard, Grand Funk Railroad, Hellstorm, Breaking Benjamin, Shinedown, Three Doors Down, Saliva, Buck Cherry, Seven Dust, Clutch, Corrosion of Conformity, Typo Negative, White Zombie, Prong, Helmet. Man, my friends, the list is great. The list is long. TheThunderUnderground.com. You can check out everything there. You can listen directly there. Wherever you're listening right now, be sure to like, follow, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. You can listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard. Also, if you hit up the website, you can find links to all the socials there. So give me a follow on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok. All of these platforms, I've got content that comes out every single day. It's not just this podcast. There's daily content, which includes news, trivia, random, facts released on this day type stuff, humorous stuff, clips from movies. It's all over the place. So give us a follow on whatever social media platforms that you're on. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. Once again, a massive thank you to the voice of rock, the mighty Glenn Hughes, Freeman Promotions, Sunset Tattoo, DEB Concerts, and Rocklahoma Bitches. And until next time.